Hello, everyone. I'm Eben Graves, and I coordinate the Fellows program at the Yale Institute of Sacred Music. We are an interdisciplinary graduate center here at Yale for the study and practice of sacred music, worship, and the related arts. And this interview today continues our socially distant Zoom interview series, which we're calling Reflections from Quarantine. And I'm very happy today to be with my colleague, Dr. Ranu Roychoudhuri, who is an ISM Fellow and a lecturer at Yale University for the current academic year. She specializes in the modern and contemporary arts and visual culture of India. Hello, Dr. Roychoudhuri.
Hello, Dr. Greaves.
In case you don't know, the ISM Fellows program, now in its 10th year, is a program here at the Institute of Sacred Music meant to diversify and deepen the work being done on sacred music, worship, and the related arts. Scholars and artists such as Dr. Roychoudhuri from around the world apply to this program to work on an interdisciplinary project that adds to and draws from the rich intellectual and artistic environment of the ISM in Yale. So Dr. Roychoudhuri, I know in a minute we'll hear about your own research into photography in South Asia, but I thought we could begin today by having you lend your critical eye as a scholar of photography to comment on some of the various modes of photographic representation that we're seeing today related to the COVID-19 crisis. I'm sure we're all spending more time than usual staring at screens and reading the press and what have you. So perhaps you could just, as you see it, what are some of the different genres of photography that are emerging right now?
Thank you so much. Yeah, even I'm looking through the press and looking at a lot more photographs than usual, and a lot more photographs are being published in mainstream media as well as in social media. Journalists as well as citizens or journalists are documenting their everyday lives inside and outside home in quarantine and how life is playing out. So as I look through the international media, there are a couple of like ways in which this particular human experience in COVID is being represented. And I would very much like to share my screen to show you some of these images. A bulk of the photographs that we are coming across these days are of this city spaces, devoid of people, popular travel centers, travel hubs like the Union Station in New York City, and then this street in San Francisco. So this is definitely one of the major thing that has emerged in recent days. And similarly, from South Asia, here you have a photograph on top left from Srinagar, down right from Calcutta, of extremely busy roads, completely empty during a weekday, which is very unlikely in a general condition. And the other sort of images that you see is people working from home, people spending their time indoors. And often these photographs are extremely intimate. Like, for example, this photograph on the right, when you have toenails peeping out of this tub water, and then you have this liver here and the reflection of the liver. There's an oblique light falling on the water and on the toes. So it's kind of a very intimate moment, but these are kinds of photographs that people are sharing in mainstream media as well as in social media. This particular photograph of toenails is from New York Times, and photographers as well as others are documenting their lives. The next kind of the other kind of photograph you see is how the people related to medical profession are responding to COVID. And like first responder, this is a photograph from Kerala, and here a person is being tested. This is a quarantine center, a makeshift quarantine center in Calcutta. And finally, you have photographs of migrant daily wage laborer who were forced to return back to their home after the sudden lockdown in India. And this is a photograph of people walking back. Often these people are walking back hundreds of kilometers, and often they are dying of exertions. And India has already lost a lot of lives from this long walk home. this is on top left, you have yet another photograph of this migrant daily wage laborer walking back. Down right, you have a Reuters photograph of how people are waiting in queues for the free ration. Often these free rations are provided by the government, often like community organizations and individual initiatives are distributing this free rations. But a large number of people in India are waiting in queues and facing this distress in time of the COVID. Yesterday, I also came across another Reuters photograph of this fire sacrifice happening in Kolkata, and it's basically to ward off this pandemic. And here you have a caption written. It says "Corona Mukti Joggo," which means the fire sacrifice to get rid of Corona. So people in different places are worshiping. So that's also part of this experience of living through COVID. Interestingly, in this photograph, you have people not maintaining the prescribed social distancing norms as they are doing the ritual.
Yeah, it's a fascinating image.
Yeah, so these are some of the photographs. So first you have photographs of cities without people, then you have photographs of places with people, and when you see places with people, these are the few images, a few kinds of images that I'm coming across.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I wonder if we could just keep with the theme of crisis. And I know that your own research deals extensively with photography and humanitarian crisis in India. So I'm wondering if you see any similarities, any differences between the way that current COVID-19 crisis is being represented in photography and your own research into past crises that have occurred.
Absolutely. So, in the context of current crisis, a lot of past moments of public health crisis as well as other forms of humanitarian crisis have come into the public sphere. So, this is a photograph from the 1918 Spanish flu, and this is this is a hospital in the U.S. But India was like really bad, really the worst affected during the previous pandemic in 1918, and almost 18 million people died in the Spanish flu in India. So the Spanish flu photographs from India are like gradually emerging. So historical photographs uh, are taking up a lot of space in mainstream media as well as social media when people are reflecting on the current scenario. But I want to specifically talk about one particular moment of humanitarian crisis, which was the 1943 Bengal famine. And what you have in front of you is a spread from the Communist Party of India newspaper, People's War. And the photographs were made by celebrated Indian documentary photographer Sunil Jana. And he was the first person to have photographed this human condition and make those photographs public, because this was a time of Second World War, and the British government thought that making the story of the famine public would go against the British war effort, and that's why there was a severe censorship on publicizing this moment of crisis and this famine, which took millions of lives across India, beginning with Bengal and then spreading elsewhere. So documentary photography in this moment really acted as a vehicle through which to make the crisis public and then solicit wider responses. And it's only after this photograph went out into the world that the government was pressurized to respond to the situation, and also a lot of humanitarian aid from abroad came, and other photographers from around the world traveled to India to cover this famine. This is yet another photograph of made by Sunil Jana in 1946 in Andhra Pradesh. So although the famine began in 1943, it continued through 1946. And there were moments where you see all these emaciated bodies depicted on the photographic surface. Here you have two photographs, one by Sunil Jana, another by Margaret Borkwhite. And Borkwhite went to India during the 1940s 3 times, and one of them was during the famine in 1946. And Jana and Borkwhite really collaborated together. And as you see, I mean, it's pretty obvious that they were at the same time, almost at the same moment. And there are all these fascinating anecdotes about how they collaborated and made photographs indoors. So Jana did not have as much resources in terms of photographic equipment as Borkwhite had. So Jana would often expose his film in Borkwhite's flash. So, and that's why, I mean, if you look at the respective shadow, not in this particular photograph, but there are moments where you can actually compare a Jana photograph and a Borkwhite photograph to think about how people, the photographers from India and from abroad were simultaneously collaborating and responding to the famine. In the 1940s, another moment I want to reflect on is the moment of communal violence in the wake of the declaration of partition of India. And even it continued even after the partition. So this is a spread from Life magazine. Again, this is Borkwhite. This is this scene is from Calcutta, a really heart-wrenching scene of how communal violence can take numerous lives, and how like vultures are actually waiting to notch on this human remains on the street. Yet another photograph I want to show you is from this the moment of partition, and again a spread from Life, the Great Migration, which is the mass exodus that happened across the Indo-Pak border after 1947. And I mean, again, I mean, these are the moments that kind of resonate in the current crisis of how this migrant wage laborers are walking long distance and to try to go to their home. And in this situation, I mean, home meant very different thing. Often people had to leave their home to find another home on the other side of the border, and they had to take all these journeys on foot. And of course, I mean, a lot of people died in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating link, you know, along the thread of migration. It would seem to link these two moments. And also, I mean, differences too. It seems like so many of the photographs you're showing us from these previous crises are so much more graphic, perhaps, than what we're seeing in terms of COVID-19 today. And my knowledge is certainly not exhaustive of this, but a lot of the photos I've been seeing are of, you know, makeshift mortuaries that are just kind of showing refrigerated vehicles, but, you know, obviously not showing kind of graphic photographs that you have here. So it's interesting, you know, connections and differences as well there. So did you want to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, also the way we like the convention of depicting graphicness on the photographic surface has changed a lot. I mean, for example, a lot of things that you could like circulate in the public earlier is not done anymore. So conventions of photography change, practices change, and that kind of is always reflected on the kinds of images we see in the media. Let me just give you an interesting example of how conventions change depending on the situation. So for this particular photograph, there was Borkwhite, and of course there were other photographers as well. And there was a British photographer, and so when this British photographer sent the similar kind of image of vultures and this human remains to London, the editor for the particular photographer refused to publish this photograph, saying that it's not compatible with the British taste, while Barkowitz' photograph was actually published in Life. So the kind of graphic photograph you come across also depend on a lot on what the target audiences are, and who is photographing, and who the editor is, and what the editor think will be an appropriate photograph for the intended audience.
Fascinating. Well, I guess from these images filled with people that we find, another genre you mentioned were these empty urban spaces. And I know we've chatted a little bit before our discussion today about an actual history and kind of genealogy of these different collections of empty urban spaces. So I was wondering if you could give us a few examples of those.
Absolutely. So here you have one such photograph from 1858, Lucknow. It was made by the British-Italian photographer Felice Biero a year after the revolt of 1857, which saw Lucknow and other major cities in North India damaged in the fight between the British and the soldier who revolted against the British. So and again, I mean, this is a space that's supposed to be inhabited by people, but you have this completely emptied out palace complex, and in many ways it looks eerie, and it looks as eerie as the kinds of empty space images we are encountering these days. Yet another empty space made by Eugene Adger, a French photographer at the turn of the 20th century, when Paris was about to go through a modernization project. What Adger wanted to do is to preserve the pre-modernization Paris in photographs, and he extensively photographed this spaces in Paris devoid of people. Again, this is a Werner Bishop photograph right after the Second World War in Berlin, and this is of course the Brandenburg Gate. And you have very few people here. There's two cars, one person on bike, and few people in the distance, like a few faded human figures walking. But pretty much this is emptied out space. I mean, again, this is another one. This is made in 1951 by Werner Bishop when he was traveling in India. This is the 18th century observatory in Jaipur. Usually this is pretty full with people, but this particular photograph, of course, was made deliberately to make it seem like a space without people. So as you saw from these example, photographers from mid-19th century through the present have depicted all the urban and non-urban spaces without people and how eerie they may look. And now in currently you have this whole genre of photographs circulating in the internet that's about this abandoned cities. So you have photographs of abandoned cities from China, so abandoned cities from other places in Europe, in South Asia. Often they are showcased as abandoned haunted places, but just abandoned spaces. So there are many reasons why people depicted the spaces without people, and why they were without people to begin with. Oh, sorry.
Well, it's fascinating to hear a little bit more about that history. And I think you gave us a quick preview there. I think you have a final photo for us that you'd like to share that tells us a little bit more about what's going on today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one photograph that I was really stuck with for past couple of days is this photograph of how people are not quite being responsible about discarding the personal protective equipment. And this I have seen in on this photograph, as well as when I take my walk in New Haven. There are often this discarded gloves and face masks that's scattered everywhere. So this is yet another experience of like how people are encountering COVID and responding to COVID in not so responsible way.
Well, this is a good photograph to end with and a good message that we can all take with us. So thanks, Dr. Roychoudhuri, for sharing all of these different examples today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greaves, for having me. And it was absolutely wonderful to talk to you over these photographs.
It was a real pleasure. And thank you to everyone else out there for listening. There will be more of these Zoom style interviews coming soon. So please follow us at ism.yale.edu or on other social media platforms. Until then, we wish everyone good health. So please stay safe and look out for more interviews from us. Bye-bye.